Good morning to all of you. Thanks so much for joining us today. It's really good to hear all the folks saying hello in the chat box as we get started. My name is Sarah Hackney, and I'm the Coalition Director for the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition based in Washington, D.C. I want to welcome you all to today's webinar focused on the new USDA Direct Aid Program for Farmers and Ranchers, the Coronavirus Food Assistance Program, or CFAP. If you're just signing on and you haven't said hello yet, we'd love for you to say hi in the chat box. Let us know who you are, where you're beaming in from today, and it would just be great to see you all. So thank you for saying hello, and we're ready to get started. And just to get us grounded for a moment or two as we kick off this webinar, just first a reminder, our goal for today is to help you gain an understanding of this new program so that you can help producers in your communities make sound decisions about applying for federal aid through this program. I do want to make it clear up front, we are definitely not official USDA spokespeople. We are nonprofit advocates working to help interpret the program, who it can help, what it all means, to fill in information gaps, and to support you in your work directly in the field with producers. For a little bit of context, CFAP is one of the biggest single direct aid payments ever to be delivered at once to farmers. It's about $16 billion. We thus have a really important opportunity this spring to help ensure that it's distributed as broadly and equitably as possible to producers who've been impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. That said, despite efforts by many organizations, including a lot of you on this call, this program is not designed as well as it could have been to serve everyone. There are some flaws that we believe may make it hard for some producers to access aid commensurate with the impacts they're experiencing. Just to kind of cue up a little bit of what some of the discussion will be later, some of the producer communities we're especially concerned about include very small scale producers, highly diversified producers, producers who market under label certifications like organic or grass-fed and thus earn a price premium, producers who primarily direct market, and producers who've historically been underserved by and or discriminated against by USDA, including Black, Indigenous, and farmers of color, beginning farmers, farmers who speak languages other than English, and others. So in addition, there are some other limitations that the folks will get into in detail soon, not my specialty, but I want to emphasize a couple other key top points to get us grounded before we dive in. And first and really importantly, as you all know, this pandemic has exposed many inequities in our broader food and farm system and our society at large. We're seeing it in the news, we are seeing it in our lives and our communities every day. The worst impacts of COVID-19, both in terms of health and finances, have been steadily occurring to some of the most vulnerable communities, families, and workers. It is clear to us in our analysis of this program that it is in many ways a missed opportunity to work towards redressing some of those inequities when it comes to the food and farm community. I just want to acknowledge that up front and to emphasize that as we work through this and we talk about what this program can do and what this program may not be able to do, just want to acknowledge that we may share in some of your rightful frustration and that we are all here with you to work on the critical efforts moving forward to continue to demand better and more from our government as we move through this crisis together. So to that end, we're going to be carrying two really key messages forward today throughout this webinar. One, doing our absolute best with outreach and technical assistance to help the producers we serve make sound decisions about applying for this aid. And two, highlighting the flaws in the program and organizing where we can for more inclusive, equitable aid solutions for the folks we serve. The bulk of today's webinar will focus on breaking down and interpreting CFAP for you to help you all get resourced up, get your questions answered, so we can get as much aid out to folks who need it as possible. And just one final note, we're focusing today just on CFAP, the new USDA program, given the timing and scale of it. We're not going deep today on other federal aid like the Small Business Administration programs, but we can direct you some great resources after for those. And let me just offer a quick thank you and deep gratitude to our co-hosts today, folks from Farm Aid and the Farmers Legal Action Group. It is a genuine privilege and joy to work with these folks and be in partnership with longtime advocates. And I'm so happy to be here with them today, and you're going to hear from all of them in a few minutes. With that, let me pass it over real quick to Alesha Harvey from Farm Aid for an agenda walkthrough and some Zoom 101.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Alesha. Really good to see so many of your names and faces. I know several of you are members of National Sustainable Ag Coalition. Many of you are partnering with Farm Aid in our Farmer Resilience Initiative to respond to COVID right now. And some of you are from the broader community who have come in, and we're really grateful to see so many important people across the country joining us for this conversation. So we're gonna start our conversation with just a little bit of framing about disasters and what we see often happens with farm communities moving through disasters. It'll be very quick, and from there we'll go over CFAP program and what you need to know. We'll open it up for a Q&A for maybe 20 minutes and then move into policy opportunities that we see to improve the CFAP program and potentially shape additional aid that may come at the federal level. We will have a Q&A about 10 minutes for that section. And then we'll end with some next steps and resources for outreach and action for all of us. Just some basics on Zoom. We are recording this and we will be making it available afterwards for those who weren't able to join us or who want to revisit the material. Everybody is muted for audio quality. And if you are new to Zoom, take a moment to find the chat box and the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. We will be taking questions through the Q&A box. So to help more folks be heard, if we do not get through them all, we'll be able to follow up at some point. When you use the Q&A, that's really what we want for questions only and not the chat box. For those on the phone, we will also open up questions by phone if we're able to during our Q&A sessions. All right, so we're gonna just shift real briefly into understanding or introducing the idea of this pandemic as a natural disaster. We are in a moment, I think, as Sarah hinted or spoke to, of global trauma. Communities are grieving. Some are in chaos or in disarray. Lives will be lost in our farm communities, and some farms will be lost. And so we're also in a moment of experiencing a lag time between when impact is felt and when responses and support are being offered, and a mismatch between what's actually needed and what's being delivered. I want to give some credit to our friends at the Rural Advancement Foundation International, RAFI USA, who has shaped a lot of farm aids understanding and thinking about natural disaster response and recovery for farm communities. There are a lot of traditional frameworks around disaster recovery that will be referred to here. And I just want to also note that in many cases, this may not be culturally competent for a lot of communities. For example, when we talk about the disillusionment phase of recovery for communities you may be working with, there are many communities in our country who that is a moot point. It's way past disillusionment, and their way of moving through a particular moment of disaster may not follow the same arc. A note here that it really matters that you're engaging with farmers at this time and that you're supporting them. The role you play in your communities is critical. It matters how you support them and how you do the work you do. And it also matters that you're taking care of yourselves and that we're creating a community with each other to be supportive. Because there are some frameworks we can employ from natural disasters to sort of understand and anticipate what COVID might be feeling like for people as they move through it. That's why we're employing it here. As you work with farmers in trying to access CFAP or other programs that may support them in their recovery, one tip that we want to impart is that it's really critical that we engage them in a caring manner, not just about their farm business, but them as people. How are they doing? How are their family doing? I can't tell you how many times on calls with partners that there's been a death in the family or somebody who is sick right now that they know. And that is the reality we're all grappling with. And so meeting people where they are and as people is a really critical component of how we need to be working with farm communities just like we would anyone else. It's critical that we employ patience and that we ask questions to try to get the fuller picture of what's going on for the farm. When people are in stress, they're not operating with the same agency or capacity that they may be normally. They may not be thinking in a linear fashion. They may struggle to answer basic questions that in a normal time they would not have any issues with. That's normal or understood as normal during times of great stress. And it means that as service providers and those working with farmers, you may need to really slow down and take more time and go over basics. You may need to really retrace the steps. You may get a story that goes into many tributaries, and you may need to take time to try to be the person to help put the fuller picture together of what's been going on in the farm. The other thing I'll just say is that we're in interesting stages of disaster recovery if we use that framework across the country. There's in traditional understandings of disasters, there's often an understanding that there's a heroic and a honeymoon phase where people are diving right into action to support each other. There's a real sense of communities coming together, people working across communities who don't normally interact with each other. And generally a big sense of working with each other on the basics. Are you safe? Are you okay? Really putting relationships first. In the honeymoon phase, you see larger agencies and media swooping in, promising they'll be there to support. And those beginning phases can span from days to weeks, to even months in some cases. And then a phase called the disillusionment phase can set in, where there are more snags, where people may feel abandoned because the recovery is not moving at the speed they need, because people who were there at first are not there any longer. Again, it's why your roles in your communities are really critical. It's certainly why Farm Aid partners with local communities when we do disaster recovery, because we know you are the people who are there in the long run with those farmers, and the relationships you build with them in the moment of disaster matter for how the trajectory of that farm over time, and also the ability to co-create with them how to do better, how to create better programs and policies out of what we're experiencing. Ultimately, recovery becomes important, and our true recovery phase happens when people have a sense of agency in their own recovery, where they are both able to receive help, but also help others. And so we just want to plant the seeds with that, and also that we are very aware of the need to be connecting the dots, particularly when there's new programs being developed, between what's happening on the ground and those of us working at the national level to translate those experiences into fixes and better policies or programs that fill those gaps. And so all of that is some of the experience we bring into this conversation today. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to our friends at the Farmers Legal Action Group.
Hi, this is Stephen Carpenter at Farmers Legal Action Group, or FLAG. I'm here with my colleague, Lindsay Keene, and we are going to talk today about sort of the nuts and bolts of CFAP. And in such a short time, we can't really do too terribly much of that. So actually what we're really trying to do is give you a little bit of a sense of the outline. And what we've done is write a farmer's guide to CFAP that is now online at the Farmers Legal Action Group website. It's free and downloadable, and I feel like I have to say this every time, but it's 60 pages and dry as dust. But we hope that there's a lot of good information in it. So when we write these guides, and we're trying to be detailed, we're trying to make it fairly accessible, and we want it to be from a farmer's perspective, and also from this perspective of perhaps people trying to do some policy work. And we originally did a farmer's guide to COVID-19 relief, and that changed rapidly enough that we've done 2 editions of that. For reasons, of timing, CFAP wasn't existing yet. So those first 2 guides to COVID-19 relief didn't really include CFAP, but now we have a program. So now we're talking about it, and ultimately it will all be bound together in a single guide, I guess. So with that said, what we're saying here today is discussed in detail in the guide. It gives you authority. It tells you how we reached the conclusions we reached, what the law is, we think, and how to use it. And before we go any further, I think it makes sense just to say for 1 second kind of what our perspective is about the program. You know, the first thing that we see is there's lots of money here, and it's going to farmers. Some farmers are getting money. That's good, and it's of interest, and it means, you know, it's worth figuring it out. Second of all, sort of following on Sarah, you know, the design of the program is troubling, is a good polite way to describe it. And we are not going to shy away from talking about those. Here's our goal. We want the people that you work with to make good, informed decisions about whether to proceed with CFAP, how to best use it if you're interested, and whether you don't want to use it. It's, you know, we're kind of neutral on whether it works for people. We just want them to make a super informed decision. So with that said, we're going to talk about some of the themes of the guide. I will tell you that we were in a bit of a frantic mode here the last couple of days, because when we write something like this, we look at the federal statute, we look at the federal regulations, we look at the internal agency handbooks, the notices, the press releases, everything. And we, at the very, very end stage of this, learned of a handbook that we hadn't heretofore known existed, which only very recently came out. So we're trying to piece it all together. And the last thing I'll say about the handbook is that it will change. We've already done 2 editions of our original guide. I am quite positive we will make changes in an ongoing way about this. So with that said, we have a handful of topics. We're going to talk about farmer eligibility for CFAP, commodity eligibility for CFAP, how to apply and what some of the requirements are. We'll talk about how the payments work and a few more thoughts after that. So with that, I will turn it over to Lindsay, who will share with us information about farmer eligibility for CFAP.
Hello, everyone. As Stephen said, my name is Lindsay Keene. I'm happy to be here with you all. So we thought we would start as we try to kind of quickly make our way through this program with the big question, which is, you know, who's eligible to apply? And so the way CFAP works is they require that any farmer, anyone who applies, be what they consider an eligible producer. And that term, there's a few rules that come with that. So the first thing to know is that you can be either an individual person or a legal entity, and you can apply for a CFAP payment. If you are a person, you need to be either, there's sort of citizenship requirements that go along with this. So either a US citizen, a resident alien, or what the program calls a foreign person. And that there's a lot of details that I'm not going to go into right now that sort of define the requirements of being a foreign person. But I will say that there are extra requirements about the level of active engagement with the farm that you are committing. And as Stephen was mentioning, you know, the guide goes into a lot of detail on these issues. So I just want to kind of pinpoint those things that you should be aware of. And if it's something that you or the farmers you work with want to know more about, please feel free to look at the guide. So again, a person, a citizen, resident alien, or foreign person. In terms of the entities that can apply for CPAP, you could be a partnership, you can be any sort of legal entity, a corporation, an LLC, any other entity under state law. You can also be a tribe or tribal organization. And then finally, again, the category of foreign entity. And as with foreign person, there's additional requirements that come with that and the level of engagement that the foreign entity has with the farm. So, so that's the first aspect of being an eligible producer. The second aspect, and this might be one of the most important as we think about, you know, who's going to be able to apply. The way the CFAP program works, there's certain rules that say the type of relationship that the applicant has with either the crops or their livestock. And there's 2 main requirements with this that anyone would have to meet in order to be eligible for the program. The first is that you have to have a share in the risk of producing the crop. And this requirement, you know, might sound simple, but the way it's described in some cases, FSA or USDA will talk about it as requiring that the farmer or the producer have an ownership interest in the crop. So you need to share in the risk, and you need to have some sort of ownership interest in that crop. And you also need to be entitled to a share in the sale of the crop or the livestock. So those are two key pieces about your relationship with the livestock, the crop, with the commodity, essentially. And just to give you an example, so given those two requirements, if you were you were hired as a laborer on a farm, or you're working with someone who's doing custom field work, they are likely not going to be eligible for CPAP because they wouldn't meet those requirements for the ownership or sharing in the risk, or entitled to a sale of the actual crop or livestock. So, so that's the relationship. So again, person, legal entities, and then you have to have a certain ownership and risk in those crops or livestock. There are also a couple of smaller requirements that are pretty typical for various USDA programs. You need to have certain compliance with conservation rules. You can't have any sort of controlled substance violation. And then there is an adjusted gross income maximum, so you can't make over $900,000. For many of the farmers that you all work with, you know, that requirement may or may not, I suppose, come into play. So those are the basic requirements. I will also point out there are a few things that the rules say will just knock you out of eligibility. And that, again, is if you don't have an ownership interest in the crop or livestock, then you are not eligible. The other categories, public schools are not eligible for CFAP payments, and neither are governments, federal, state, or local. And the last requirement on that front is that if you are suspended or excluded from a federal program, you cannot apply. But importantly, you know, being delinquent on a loan wouldn't trigger that. So you can absolutely apply even if you're delinquent on a loan. So that's kind of the 101 of who can apply for CFAP. And I'm going to turn it over to Stephen to talk about sort of what the eligible crops and livestock are.
One of the important questions, of course, is what commodities that you raise make you eligible for a CFAP payment. And so the baseline first cut at that is that it has to be a commercial crop. In other words, this is not for folks self-provisioning. And there also, it has to be a price risk, which we'll talk about in a second, which is a little bit of an odd concept. But what it means is that essentially, if you had a guaranteed price for your product, and so it didn't have a price that bounced around, the commodity is not eligible. So USDA has already made a first and possibly last cut, or nearly last cut, at what commodities are eligible. They've come up with lists that are easy to find online. And you know, they kind of break down into some categories that I won't go into in a great deal of detail, but basically you have for livestock, you have dairy, and by dairy they mainly mean milk. You have wool, you have cattle, hogs, and sheep. And within that, there are some things that get left out. For example, sheep are only lambs and yearlings. So they've got their list, and quite notably, the list does not include poultry, for example, for livestock. And so for crops, they divide up between specialty, non-specialty, you know, things that you could kind of anticipate. And as I say, you can easily look them up. What's notable is all the things that are left out. How in the world did they decide this? A very good question. It's confusing. I mean, when you look at the USDA stuff, there seem to be two things going on. They're mostly concerned, when they decided what commodities are eligible, with whether or not the commodity had a price decline from basically the middle of January to the middle of May. You know, if the price went down by 5%, the commodity is basically in, if USDA believes that. At times, when you read these materials, you would come to think that market disruptions make a commodity eligible. You know, that you couldn't get it, at a large scale, the commodity couldn't be processed, it couldn't be marketed. The sort of disruptions that we are quite familiar with. Unfortunately, it's not clear whether being solely suffering a market disruption would make a commodity eligible. The USDA materials are all over the map about that. And that's of historical interest, like how do we get here? But it's actually even more important because USDA has opened the door to adding commodities. They say this specifically about two things that are so far left out: nursery crops and aquaculture. They're interested in cut flowers. So they're kind of in the camp, it seems, where they say we need more data on this, but we think they're going to be in. We just don't have the numbers figured out. There also seems to be a number of commodities where USDA just says, you know, we seem to have a lot of information, but actually we don't really know what went on with this crop. And they are the commodity, and they are encouraging us, the public, and especially producers, to provide information which would help them maybe add these commodities. And I want to emphasize that they do not mean, oh yeah, I raise tomatoes in Ramsey County, Minnesota, and somehow it's not eligible. No, they want extremely detailed information about, at a minimum, price declines. And they say they want information about other market disruptions, but I'll say again, it's not clear to me that they really even take those into account. So when you decide to try to communicate with USDA and you want commodities added, I cannot emphasize enough that you need to provide a great deal of specific information. And if it doesn't include price declines, my sense is you're going to have an uphill slog. I think a lot of us are disappointed at the commodities that are eligible. There's a window there for some additions and changes, and we will see how that pans out. But we do have an opportunity to comment. It certainly looks like for commodities where USDA has a lot of data, it will be extremely difficult to change their mind. So I think people should feel free to try to do that. You better have a lot of data, but I'm skeptical that for some of the commodities with data that they will be willing to budge at all. And so that's commodity eligibility. We want to talk for a few minutes about sign up and payments and the like. For the sign up, and there's a lot of information online. There's a calculator on the USDA website. There's a fair bit of stuff that will help you. One of the interesting things is the application itself is one page. We'll come back to the importance of that in a second. But here's the deal. If you want to deal with USDA, and you must, you're going to need to talk to them by phone, and you're going to need to set up an appointment to talk to them. It's going to be crucial, especially if you've not worked with USDA before, to deal with them directly, to get involved with them. And that means a phone appointment, and that means making a phone appointment right now. The application opened on the 26th. In theory, it goes through August 28th. As Lindsay's going to explain, there's sort of a complicated process about the money going out, which we need not delay with here. So the application is fairly brief. Along with the application, you have to do a number of other documents for USDA. They're fairly standard if you're familiar with the programs. If not, that constitutes several hoops to jump through. One often gets questions about whether you have to get a farm number. As of right now, it seems not. At least they're not saying you have to. It's not that difficult to do a farm number if that's what you want to do. But so far, that seems not required. Here's the big deal, though, with signing up and all the paperwork. The farmer is going to fill out a 2-page form that talks about the commodities they raise, their inventory, their sales. And you're just going to send it in. It is going to be self-certified. And that means you're just signing on a line that says, under penalty of perjury, I believe this stuff to be true. And USDA, by and large, is going to process basically on that. But here's the problem. First of all, you have signed to say that it's true under penalty of perjury. Perjury is a complicated legal concept. I don't think they're going to send people to prison who make mistakes, but they're going to come after people who they think are cheating them. Further, there are going to be spot checks. Further, I'm sorry, I lost everybody for a second. Sorry about that. Further, there are going to be spot checks. And what that means is that USDA will come around and they'll want to know how you got your numbers. And they don't want to hear about a really good memory. They want you to have had documents that said, oh, I had this many of this vegetable and this many of that vegetable, and this is the acreage. They may ask for those documents. You're going to need to provide them. When you sign up, you agree to provide them. You're going to need to be able to show that you intended to raise things you couldn't raise, that you intended to market things that you intended to market. You're willing to have yourself inspected by USDA. In other words, that part of it can be fairly intrusive, and you should go into it knowing that if you sign up, if you say this stuff, you're going to be able to sign and they'll likely process it, but they may come around later and ask for information, and you will not, at that point, be in a position to say no. So that is the sort of uplifting part of sign up. What about payments? Lindsay.
Okay, thanks, Stephen. So, you know, payments, something that most people, that's how you weigh whether it's worth it, right, to apply or not. The payments, I guess you could think of them, they can be both simple and extremely complicated if you try to understand the rationale. One of the things on the CFAP website, there is what they call a payment application calculator. And so there is a spreadsheet that you can go to and you can just fill in, you know, the eligible commodities, your quantity, you know, all the information they ask, and they can give you a sense of what your payment would be. So for folks who are just trying to figure out, you know, might this be worth it? You know, that might be something to look at. But the way I want to go a little deeper so we can try to understand as best we can, you know, what they were thinking when they decided how to do these payments. And it appears, as Stephen mentioned, that, you know, the eligible commodity list, and again, the only commodities, being both crops and livestock, that are eligible are those that USDA says are eligible. So this is a program that anything that's not expressly mentioned as being eligible, you simply cannot get a payment for. And payments are only paid out to those individual, or based on those individual eligible commodities. And what triggers, or what seems to have triggered whether it became eligible and whether, you know, you can get a payment, is that 5% or greater price decline. So if your commodity that you are raising, or the livestock that you're raising, if that makes the cut, then what USDA does is they're going to issue you one payment, but that's paid out in 2 disbursements. So what they are saying is that after you fill out the application for all your eligible commodities, you're going to get a total payment, and they're going to take roughly 80% of that calculated payment, and that's going to be the initial and the bulk of your CFAP payment. What they have said is that that remaining 20% or so will be dispersed someday in the future if funds remain available. And I think the stated rationale is, you know, again, as we've seen with a lot of the various programs that have come out in response to COVID-19, a lot of the money goes really quickly. And this is a first come, first served program, and they're saying that they're trying to keep that buffer in order to ensure there's enough money. So it appears that what you're guaranteed at right away is 80% of the payment as it's calculated. And then down the road, if there is still money, they will pay out the remaining amount up to, you know, the remaining 20%. It could be prorated less. So that's kind of the bulk of how the payments happen. So again, the payments are calculated based on the type of commodity. So whether you have specialty crops, non-specialty crops, livestock, milk, or wool. And within each of those, there is a formula that USDA is using to determine the payment. And this is, I think, a really key thing to understand about it. USDA has, when they determined that 5% price point trigger, they have come up with their own table for what a payment rate should be. So if you are a farmer who is, you know, selling organic at a farmer's market, you know, the price that you're getting for your crops is not what they are looking at. USDA is going to look at the quantity of your crops or the number of livestock you've sold, and then they're going to multiply that by a predetermined rate. And that, their process in coming up with that rate could probably take a whole other webinar. So I will say some of the rule that was published, and they have put out some information that tries to describe, how they came up with these payment rates. But I think the really important thing to know is that they are set. Those cannot be changed, right now, and they're available for you to see. So you can look up, if you raise potatoes, you can look up potatoes and you can see what the payment rate is. The same if you have strawberries, you can look that up and you can see what the payment rate is. So, in the sense that you can get an idea of whether it might be worth it for you or the farmers you work with, that's helpful. The other thing I will say is it seems that the way that USDA is looking at this is they're concerned with both, for example, crops that you harvested in the first part of the year, so between January and April, and that maybe you delivered off the farm, but then they got spoiled because you no longer had a market. So that's kind of one category of crops that would be eligible. They're also, looking at things that that haven't been harvested yet, and haven't left the farm. And for each of those, again, there is the payment rate that they will pay based on the quantity of those crops that you have on the farm or that you delivered, but which may have spoiled. Similarly for livestock, the way those payments work is they're going to look at the livestock that you had, as of January 15th, and any livestock you sold between January 15th and April 15th, they're going to take that and multiply that by the payment rate that they determine, and that will be based on the specific species. And for example, in cattle, there's 4 different types of cattle, and they have a different rate for each of those. So it can get pretty, you can go into the weeds a bit. But then they will also look with livestock for any animals that you had ownership of as of January 15th, but that you haven't sold, and they have a rate for that. So again, it can get, it's, in one hand, it's simple. You've got your quantity and you've got this rate they have, but it is missing a lot in terms of what it accounts for in individual operations. And again, that's why it's just important for you all who are working with farmers to be able to help people understand that so they can make the informed decision. And I have a feeling, some of friends at NSAC might get into this a little later, but some of the payments are a bit surprising, the rates. So, it is worth looking at those tables to see, some might be much lower than you would expect, some might be higher than you would expect. And as Stephen mentioned, there are just many crops and types of livestock that are not mentioned at all. So that's kind of the best I can, the summary of how the payments operate. I don't know, Stephen, do you have anything that you'd want to add on that, or?
No.
Okay.
We do want to wrap up by talking a little bit about some accountability as this process goes along. This is a great deal of money. Congress provided almost no details for what was supposed to happen with the money. USDA has created the program without much public consultation of the variety of people who care about agriculture in the country, but they have come up with a program, and so that's what we're going to try to work with here. An important question is the program be implemented fairly, and so there are a couple of aspects of that we would kind of like to highlight. One is that those of you familiar with USDA know of the appeal system, and so USDA does have a more or less independent appeal system whereby farmers who are denied a benefit may appeal, and there's a process. We were very curious about whether CFAP would allow appeals, and it turns out that it does. So for individual determinations, people will have the right to appeal. Now you can't appeal whether, certain kinds of sheep are in the program. You can appeal where they deny you or they limit your benefit based on your particular circumstances. If you think that they have misapplied the rules on the law, you have the right to appeal. The second thing that it's very much worth emphasizing is that this program should benefit many people who have not typically participated in USDA programs. It's going to be a little bit intimidating to go deal with them. It's USDA's job to make people to help them, to assist them. And if you find that that's not happening, it's something that we would be kind of interested in. We would be interested in hearing about those examples, especially when people are being actively discouraged from applying. If you go to the Farmers Legal Action website, there's an email there. We'll go to the lawyers, and Lindsay and I will certainly see it. The third thing that I wanted to mention about accountability is that, as we know, there's a widespread assumption that all farmers are white men, non-native, speak English, and we know as well that that's not true, and that there have been long-standing problems of discrimination in agriculture, perhaps especially in agriculture in this country. USDA has paid out billions as a result of lawsuits regarding the discrimination. And we know for certain that discrimination has not ended in the society at large, and one would suspect as well at USDA. So there are rules against discrimination. It's not only wrong, it's illegal. And if you, again, hear about or witness discrimination, it would be something that we would be quite interested in hearing about. And let's keep them accountable as they implement this program. With that, I will turn it over to the INSAC crew, who I believe is now going to talk about policy issues, and there are many.
And here's a quick check with the presenters. Would we like to clear out a couple of CFAP specific questions before we jump into policy?
Like I said, questions first.
Let's do that.
Yeah, I think we've been answering some as we go along. If you put them in the question and answer box. Q&A, 6 more.
Are agribusinesses eligible, like the big vertically integrated meat packers, is a question.
Are the big vertically integrated meat packers eligible? No. You have to be an eligible producer. If you have an adjusted gross income over $700,000, the entity, for example, would apply to that. I would put any big packer that I know out of eligibility. If you do value added and have a small processing facility, you should be eligible. But no, this should not result in a check to Tyson.
There is a question from Liz Henderson about, is there a minimum gross sales to qualify? She notes in New Hampshire, the legislature wanted to set a $50,000 as a minimum. No such requirement. I did mention it needs to be commercial, and as we know, with the increase in urban agriculture, there gets to be kind of a fuzzy line of what's marketed, what's not. In USDA, for this purpose, has really sort of come down on you need to have intended to sell this product, but not $50,000 worth. Maddie, do you have additional ones you want to throw out for folks?
Yep. Rachel asked, we're assuming it will be very difficult to establish a 5% price drop for forage crops, such as ramps, morels, etc., for farmers hoping to recover for those lost sales to restaurants. Are there any ideas where one could go to establish such losses?
You got me. I mean, when you read through what USDA seems to expect, it seems very demanding to me. The anecdotal data will be fine, but they're going to want something quantitative that they can feel like is verified and solid in their eyes. So, so what I would say is, unless you have, if you're going to do anecdotal individual data, you need to get quite a few people to do it. that seems your best angle to convince them. I mean, they say they want to hear from individual producers. They specifically say that. But if it's just one or two, it's hard to see them moving very far.
Janie Hip brings up, we've already heard of problems at FSA offices, folks going in to file an application, but being told that the staff didn't know how to process the application. No receipt for service was given. The application wasn't accepted. This is a note for Stephen. Please give folks guidance to tell them what to do and how to let all of us know so that we can elevate the issues in real time. We can share more about the feedback form we're pulling together towards the end of the call to collect that kind of data. But I wanted to know, Stephen, if you wanted to sort of respond to anything Janie lifted up, because likely many others will be experiencing these things.
There is no aspect of that interaction with USDA that follows their own rules. I mean, this is not something that we foisted on them, that they need to be nice to people. They have their own rules. They need to assist people. They need their own rules say you need to give, you know, a certification of service. So my first suggestion is if this happens to you, you need to understand this is totally wrong. It's not the way it's supposed to go down. I would, as best you can, document everything that just happened to you. And that actually just means write some notes to yourself about what just went on, when the meeting was, who you talked to, what they said. It's absolutely not acceptable for them not to accept an application or not to assist you with an application. And yeah, it sounds like 1982 to me, and it's frustrating. And when this happens, let's collect data, let's group things together, and let's push back.
We will be sharing at the end of the call a feedback form pulled together by Farm Aid and NSAC to collect information. And we can say more about that later on. There are questions about organic dairy. I assume it's eligibility question about organic dairy. It wasn't specified.
You want to take it, Lindsay?
So I think the dairy question was about, I think it tied back to one asking if you have to show your own decrease. And the answer is, from what we can tell, no. You know, USDA, when they created their payment rates, they determined what triggered that 5% using, you know, their methodology. And so at that point, if you have that eligible commodity, you are an eligible producer, you can go ahead and apply. So.
Great. There's a note by Mark. I'm not sure it's a question, actually. USDA tables had 3 columns or categories, one for those sold but at lower prices, one for shipped goods but spoiled, and one for unharvested or still on farm for lack of market. And that last column offered very low rates for the products. The nodding head confirmation.
This is specialty crops, right? Yeah, I mean, this is the part that they seem, I mean, I'm not saying don't complain or write or try to get Congress involved, but this is the sort of thing they seem utterly uninterested in changing. They're not even asking for comments on this. They made the rule final. They could have made the rule interim if they wanted to hear more and maybe revise some of it. So, yeah, that's one of the frustrating things about it. They come up with this number and it's, you know, I mean, I'm sorry, but they seem to think this is the final answer.
One thing maybe to lift up that has come up in other conversation is, I mean, to the point about wanting to help everybody offer the clearest information so folks can make a decision, is we, you know, as service providers also shouldn't assume whether or not the amount they would be compensated at is worth it for that farmer or not. That's really their decision. And, you know, this is money and can make a real difference at the household level. And so we should just provide that information to the best we can so they can make the decision. Jennifer asks, any idea where the price data is from collection efforts during the NAP pilot? That will be the closest thing we have for demonstrating price and loss.
You would think that would be public information. You know, if I'd be happy to try to help you. I mean, send us an email, and we would. And there may be other people too. I mean, I'm not super familiar with how to do that, but that's going to be the most convincing thing to USDA is essentially public, quantified collections of information. So if you can find something like that, you know, their right hand does not know what their left hand is doing some of the time. So if NAP has good data, absolutely do not assume that they've used it already.
Yeah. I think there's another great note here. I think just that this would be new that USDA would process a relief payment without having farm numbers on file. Can you confirm this will be the case? Language from USDA seems intentionally vague, and historically that means it will be a last-minute hook.
Boy, I agree with all that. That it's historically not been. You know, historically you had to do it. It sort of gets you into the system. There's nothing in the rules now that require it, and it is something they could change. Although once the applications start going in theory, it gets a little bit difficult for them to say, oh yeah, we forgot you have to have a farm number. So yeah, I mean, I think, you know, I know people in like our world were hoping that there would not be a farm number requirement, and so far it hasn't happened. And the suspicions that it would be a late tactic to deny people or that they would change their minds don't sound impossible. But, you know, as of right now, there's no indication it's required.
If I can hop in real quickly, there is at least one precedent in the last round of WIP payments. Producers were eligible with only a tax ID number or an EIN, but in very limited circumstances.
Mm.
This is Julie. I'm going to happen as well, just because this was a point of confusion that we don't know why USDA was intentionally vague and say that a farm number may not be immediately required. So what they're telling us is to submit an application. Everything that Stephen said and Eric said is right. A farmer should not need a farm number, so there's nothing on the application. However, if you're looking at some of the required forms, specifically the conservation compliance form, a farm number may be required to demonstrate compliance on a specific parcel or wetland. So that is where they said they're instructing offices process the application. If a farmer doesn't have a farm number, process the application and put their materials in set it aside to deal with at a later point to fill out that form specifically. So I would not say that at some point, they're telling us you can apply and you can get a payment without a farm number, but they may need to go back and establish those records.
Well, and interestingly, for the conservation compliance that you just mentioned, Julie, they're letting people self-certify for that at the first stage too. So, yeah, I mean, who knows?
Let me ask a question here that I think is we should underscore 1,000 times. Should there be electronic receipts for service emailed or faxed if farmers are helped over the phone? Can we please give guidance to folks?
Yes, I mean, USDA has relaxed its own rules, and so electronic notification is now permitted. But they're still supposed to do it, but they're allowing electronic because, I mean, there's some logic to this because people are communicating essentially over the phone.
Always.
I was just wondering, Flag Team, do you all have advice for how service providers might advise farmers to request it? Could we offer some advice on how they can ask for receipt for service?
ask for it and record what they say. I mean, not record, but, you know, take notes of what they say. I mean, you know, I don't know why this is so hard. I mean, you just acknowledge what the person asked for and what you said. I mean, if you've ever seen these things, it's not like they're super long or anything. You just have to document your interaction. And the reason for this entire requirement, which took a lot of effort by folks on this call, I mean, some of them, to require it, is because USDA would discourage people and they would walk out and there would never be any evidence of any interaction. And so the goal here is to force USDA, I'm sorry if I sound harsh, but it's to force USDA to acknowledge every single time somebody asks them to help with something or about a form or to apply for a program. And if you didn't get one and they won't give it to you, send them an email and send Flag an email. I mean, you know, there's no reason to be patient with this sort of a problem.
The last thing I see is Liz Henderson noting that New York organic dairy farmers say this could work well for them since they have not suffered any decrease, though the price they have been getting is not high enough to fully cover costs.
One size fits all in USDA's mind.
Well, that looks like we got through the docket of questions. We are in a separate document keeping track of them for those that were not asked anonymously or with sensitive information we could share with folks. We think it'd probably be useful for folks to have access to them.
Great. And I think we can now pass it over to the Julie asked, can we ask for questions from the phone? I think what we'll do is we'll go ahead and shift into policy here for a few minutes, and then we've got one more Q&A round. So Eric's going to do about 10 minutes on sort of some of the policy and political overlay of this, including some additional opportunities to improve the program. And then we'll open up for one more question round. And for those of you on the phone, we'll see if technologically we can open it up for you to ask questions. If for some reason we're unable on the tech side, please know that we would welcome your questions after. But for now, let me hand it over to Eric.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for such a kind introduction. I'm going to cover a little bit about the CFAP policy and about ways that we might be able to make a program that has some pretty significant flaws better going forward. As Sarah mentioned at the top, we're not USDA. We did not write this program. We have worked hard to help shape it, not always successfully. And because of that, what I'm going to do is take a step back and give you a little bit of the history of the program so that you can understand how it came to be what it is right now. From the beginning, there was an effort to build a program that ensured that smaller, diversified farmers, underserved producers were eligible for a direct payment. It was particularly important for local and regional producers and folks that relied on direct sales for a premium price for their product, because some of the things that limit the impact of the coronavirus pandemic are the exact things that sort of eliminate folks' markets overnight. The closing of schools and public institutions, shutting down restaurants, closing places of public assembly like farmers markets. And so recognizing that local and regional producers and folks that use direct market channels suffered significant losses in the early part of the pandemic, everyone understood that it was important to make sure that those folks were treated fairly and that there was dedicated funding set aside for them to be eligible for payments. So in the first round of legislative drafting, this looked like a program that paid farmers, particularly local and regional farmers, based on their revenue. Then, by the time we got to the second draft, it was about paying farmers based on their documented losses. A little bit more workshopping, and finally local and regional producers were reduced to a mention in the CARES Act as one of the eligible groups of producers that could receive part of a $9.5 billion allotment of funding, along with dairy and livestock producers and specialty crop growers. Well, go a little bit further forward, and local and regional producers are sort of reduced to a mention in early CFAP program documentation, and they all but disappeared. in the final rule, which is what we're talking about today. Essentially, you will see local and regional producers mentioned in some of the early documents, but you will not see anything that looks like a local and regional price. You will not see anything about documenting losses for shifting markets or shifting market tools. And you will see 44 eligible specialty crops and no more, as Stephen had mentioned. So despite the fact that it's obvious that local and regional and direct market producers suffered pretty significantly, they are not really, they're certainly not central to this rule, and they're barely even a part of it. And so the question becomes, what can we do about it? First, I think it's really important to understand that we are not going to change the fundamental structure of this program going forward. USDA is not going to switch horses midstream. As Lindsay said, this is about a drop in commodity prices and how much of that commodity you might have produced. It's not about a farmer's actual loss. It doesn't pay for a farmer's actual prices. And it doesn't accommodate or consider payments that or costs that farmers may have incurred as they shifted markets, adapted new technologies, and perhaps considered different ways to grow or process or ship or deliver their products. Payment is obviously based on yield and USDA's calculated number. Because of all that, and as Stephen had said, this program is already up and running. Checks are probably going to start going out towards the end of next week. We can't change what we have right now. All we can do is work together to try to make sure that farmers have the best information that they can about whether or not the program is going to work for them. That isn't to say that we can't do anything. And the first opportunity that we have is the Nofa process, which has already been mentioned. There is a 30-day window. It's open now. Stephen had mentioned that there is the opportunity to add additional eligible commodities to the list that USDA will make payments on. As a matter of fact, USDA has reserved $600 million, or slightly more than $600 million, in order to make newly eligible commodity crops, to make payments on those crops. Just as a review, if you are considering putting forward a crop that you grow or that is produced in your area or by farmers that you work with, it needs to have a 5% drop in value between the weeks of January 13th and 17th and April 6th and 10th, if it's a specialty crop. And for all other crops, it needs to have a 5% drop in value during the week of April 6th to April 10th. Okay, that is the number one thing that you have to do in order to be eligible as a commodity crop. So the question then becomes, how do you prove this? And Stephen had alluded earlier, the bar seems pretty high, but it also seems pretty vague. And USDA has not been entirely forthcoming about the type of documentation that's going to be necessary in order to demonstrate the price loss, as well as the actual price and what the compensation rates should be. So you're going to need, if you're going to put something on the Nofa list, very strong documentation. It is going to be much better if you have more than one producer petitioning on the same crop, if it's coming from more than one region, and if there is specific information about additional value that is earned from that product, because it's organic, because it's sold direct, because it's maybe has some other type of differentiation like pasture-based. All of that is really important to go ahead and include in that Nofa. It's going to be up to you and your producers to put this information forward, and it is going to be very helpful if in the process of petitioning for Nofa, you can point to an alternative data set that has USDA prices in it. Earlier today in the questions, somebody mentioned the NAP pilot program. That is a perfect example. So if you or others understand or know of a data set that can be of help to other farmers, please let us know that information, and we will be certain to work it into our Nofa comments and support other folks who are doing the same. The second thing that we can do is we can continue to work with the legislature. The House passed the HEROES Act. It looks very similar to the CARES Act, and that is to say that it's pretty much CFAP 2.0. There are some significant improvements. There's additional language about premium prices. There's some additional money in order to cover losses in the second quarter, but they're not very specific. And as we've seen, when USDA isn't given very strict instructions, they kind of do their own thing. So we're going to continue to work in the Senate to pass legislation, move specific bills that make sure that diversified farmers are included, that supports the middle of the value chain that's also been affected by the coronavirus pandemic, and that's including things like slaughter plants, helping to get PPE funding out to farmers, farm workers, and food processors, and making sure that farmers who have been growing into direct and local regional markets are still eligible to provide SNAP customers with their benefits. That's what we can do, which is far less important than what you can do. And what you can do is you can call your senators and representatives. If you do not like this program, if you are having questions and you do not like the answers that we are providing, if this is not going to work for your folks, call your legislator. Right now, the Senate is considering legislation that will define their version of the C4 or the fourth coronavirus response. And there's a lot of positioning going on. And if you have strong feelings about how this does or does not work for you, now is the time for you to weigh in. As always, NSAC is happy to work with you and everybody else in the panel today to make sure that your voice gets heard. So I believe that I am right at time. Look at that. So are there any questions about the policy and current moves in the legislature and in the administration as it relates to CFAP?
I don't yet see in the Q&A box, which we would still encourage people to use if they have questions. There's a question about, can panelists share more about payment limits or the lack thereof in this program?
So there are a couple of payment limits. Each eligible commodity has a maximum payment limit of $125,000, and an individual is capped out at $250,000 in a single payment. However, there are some ways around this. For example, if there are multiple folks who are engaged in an operation, particularly those that are structured as joint ventures or other corporate structures, they may receive payments beyond the $250,000. That's an individual limit in those cases. But of course, it's been mentioned that there are AGI restrictions, which I think is covered in the earlier section.
Well, I could add too, there's some political pressure, right, Eric, to make changes to those payment limits in the next bill, right? And that could very much have an impact on the overall availability of funding, particularly for smaller or mid-scale growers.
It will come as no surprise that there are very large operations that will be limited by the ability to claim payment that covers what they feel that their losses have been. And so there is a lot of pressure to go ahead and expand the amount of, both to increase the AGI limit as well as to increase the total amount of payment that you can get per individual. This is a first come, first served program, right? There's a lot of money here. There's $16 billion in this program, but that is not as much as we anticipate people will apply for. And so to echo what Stephen had said, getting into FSA, making an application early is really important because we are concerned, and that's with the current payment limitations, right? So if you were to increase the amount of payment limitations or increase the amount of maximum payment, it would be entirely possible that the amount of money, 16 billion, could be drawn down very quickly and leaving those producers, particularly those that have significant documentation requirements, at the end of the queue, and therefore far less likely to actually receive
payment. USDA had the flexibility to make those much more powerful and chose not to.
Yeah, that's true. Question from Frank James. This is a good sort of political question. Can you say more about what you think moved USDA from providing relief based on individual losses to the commodity-based loss model that they adopted instead?
I can't tell you the exact answer, but I can say that every point of the conversation that we've had with USDA, they stressed the importance of being able to get a national program with a single price that was simple to operate and simple to understand. And so it was recommended that they consider this approach. There was quite a bit of conversation within the agency about what is the most appropriate path. And they chose simplicity over accuracy in this particular case.
Great question. Can you take a couple more questions? All right.
I see a question from Sarah Maubrey. Can I answer this one? She's wonderful.
Please, please.
Sarah says that she's got 80 hogs right now and asks, is this program right for a person like me? I can't give you the answer because I don't know all of the parameters for your operation, but what I can tell you is that USDA has a payment calculator, and it is a pretty simple tool, and it's a very good tool for figuring out maybe not exactly what you would get from the program, but seeing what you might be eligible for. And so going into that tool, using it, putting in those 80 hogs, whether or not they were sold, whether or not you kept them in inventory, what age and size they were at the time, might give you the answer that you need about whether or not it makes sense to apply.
Mm-hmm. Here's a really good question from Omar Rodriguez. That one was just answered. Looks like someone typed it in. Is FSA, we might add a little bit this live, is FSA providing assistance or guidance to non-English speakers?
So yes, USDA has a translation service, but it is an open question about how in a socially distanced application environment, they're going to understand who's on the other end of the line asking for assistance and helping and to figure out what language is best available or is most appropriate for that caller. USDA has asked specifically about how they can do this better, and we know that they are working now to provide both translation services and make it easy for FSA field staff to direct folks towards the language support that they need. In the same way that Stephen had mentioned earlier, if there are problems that folks experience in getting translation services, that is something we absolutely want to know about. That is incredibly important in making sure that USDA fulfills its obligations.
Then here's a good policy question. Will we push for payments for added costs for producers who might be changing market strategies within the local and regional and direct market community in the C4 Senate package?
The answer is yes. In the same way in which there are some pretty significant deficiencies in how USDA has calculated prices for farmers that grow for local and regional markets, there's also no accounting for the additional costs that folks incur. So we've seen a lot of folks that may have sold at farmers markets in states where they are no longer open switch to a CSA or direct delivery model. And it would be very important in order to help those folks get some money to make that transition, or at least to help defray the costs that they've already incurred. This program is kind of a weird PLC program, when what it really should be is a revenue protection program, if that sort of framing makes sense for some folks.
Did you want to speak at all, Eric, to the marker bill that is in motion in the Senate about this opportunity? You don't have to.
Actually, no, I want to tag in Julie here because she's been on the back typing out all these questions, and I want to give her a chance as well.
Sarah, were you referring to the Stabenow marker bill?
That might just be a good thing to highlight for folks, especially if you're thinking, how is this program going to help? There's a hope for some potential additional sorts of aid in the Senate. It might be good to let folks know about it.
I'm actually going to punt that back to Eric. Yes. Thanks.
You can tell which one of us read the marker bill. No, okay, so it is to say that Senator Stabenow has introduced a bill that would do a couple of things. It provides PPE, which I think I mentioned earlier, to farmers and food system workers, but more centrally, it helps to, it's about $15 billion in total funding that would be made available to help buy food from farms into food bank systems, and also to help offset the costs that farmers have incurred as they transition between markets. It's a marker bill, but it was introduced with co-sponsorship by Senator Schumer, as well as the entirety of the minority side of the Ag Committee. And so we understand that to mean that's really important to those members and that it is going to be central in the conversation going forward. And we, speaking as NSAC, are very supportive of that.
All right, and I think we are right at about time, so I think we can take, we have one more question. This is a good policy question from Emily. Hi, Emily. You mentioned revenue protection. Will NSAC be looking for farmers to be able to demonstrate a whole farm revenue loss in C4? Great question.
The answer is yes, but it is going to be an enormous uphill push and will, quite frankly, rely on the amount of grief that members hear from their constituents. We've been trying and will continue to try to get a program that is more equitable and more reflective of the losses that an individual farmer incurred, rather than a generic net payment based on a generic national commodity price loss. And we think that it's more fair, we think that it's more equitable, and we think that it's ultimately more accurate. And so we will absolutely continue to push for the accounting of loss as the sort of like most important element about how much you would receive as a payment. But we're also cognizant of the fact that we don't want to bury farmers in paperwork, right? If you are a diversified small farmer that sells 50 different crops in 20 different markets over the course of a season, that's an enormous amount of paperwork. And so we're very conscious of making sure that we do not put this burden onto producers and make them account for every single carrot that they sold at every single market.
Thank you, Eric. And I hear just a comment on that about, should we get traction with revenue protection, that we should try to limit paperwork required to qualify, to reduce the paperwork burden on producers.
Farming is hard enough without the paperwork. Obviously, if you're going to submit an application for the existing program, certainly going to need to keep the documentation, as Stephen had mentioned earlier. Going forward, we will do all that we can to make sure that that doesn't spiral out of control and put too much burden on producers.
Thank you. So I think I want to hand it to Alesha, who I believe we're going to try to check in with our folks who are calling in with audio on a phone, just in case anybody's been waiting to ask a question and didn't have access to the chat box.
Yep, so I see 3 folks who are call-in listeners. I'm gonna unmute you and give you a couple moments if you wanna ask us any questions. So you are unmuted if you're calling in by phone at the moment. I see a 213 number, a 440 number, and a 412 number. Do any of you have a question you'd like to bring forward?
This is Lynn Hayes with the Farmers Legal Action Group. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Lindsay, you answered the question in the chat, but I was hearing that organic dairy farmers are being told that because they have a contract for their milk, they're not eligible for CFAP. And Lindsay correctly said that if there's a forward contract as of January 15th, 2020, they're not eligible. I just wanted to clarify and see if I'm correct on this, Lindsay, that if there's anything in the price aspect in that contract that is not a set or fixed price, they could still be eligible. And I don't know enough about exactly the wording of dairy organic contracts, but there may be some variation in that price that isn't fixed, and then they would be eligible. Is that, I see Lindsay and Stephen nodding their heads. I assume that's correct.
Yeah, yes, you're exactly right, Lynn. It has to be, for the forward contract to kind of kick you out of eligibility, that contract has to have an agreed upon price. So you need to have some sort of potential for price fluctuation after that January 15th date in order to be eligible.
I mean, as we know, the mailbox price for dairy, bounces around for all sorts of weird reasons. And if any of those reasons are due to market fluctuations in the price of milk or other market fluctuations, then that person should be eligible, is the way I read it.
There was also, anyone else who's on the phone only want to ask a question? For everybody else, feel free to raise your hand and we'll call on you and you can unmute yourself. Is it worth sharing the cooperative question verbally? Yeah.
I think so, yeah.
Cooperative eligibility.
What is the question?
Are cooperatives eligible?
Lindsay? I mean, I obviously co-op members, and if you sell to your co-op, you're eligible. I don't remember seeing co-op in the entities that are eligible. So my first take is no, but we can look it up. Lindsay?
Yeah, I didn't see anything that specifically pointed it out, though the entities do allow for anything organized under state law. So I guess my tendency might have been yes. So the conclusion is whoever has that question, we can do a little more research and try to get an accurate response.
I think you're right. I think that actually might, I think you're right. But we can look it up.
I answered a bit more definitively in the questions, but I certainly defer to the expertise of the flag.
And for what it's worth, Adam Rothison says he thinks so as well. Thanks, Adam.
Oh, did that answer your question? I see that you have your hand raised.
Somewhat. I think we're still looking at expressly what you just mentioned, Lindsay, which is the entity organized under the state law. But I think also there is, there are a number of questions related to shared interest in profits and losses and et cetera, right? And so whether they can claim all of those things individually or collectively is also a part of our question.
I mean, ordinarily a cooperative is a creation of state law. So actually you should be okay there. I don't know what state you're in, but that's the normal thing. So then it comes down to these other eligibility requirements, and especially if the co-op is very big. And I mean, it's easy to imagine a co-op becoming uneligible, but I think that these guys are right that there's not a per se rule that says no co-ops.
Well, we have a number of different co-ops, and especially in the Southeast, and the Rural Coalition that we're asking about this. And one of the entities is a agricultural marketing cooperative. So yeah, so we would love to do a deeper collaborative inquiry with you all.
Of course, we'd be happy to.
Yep, and something else I can add from INSAC is that we're looking, thank you, Annie, for flagging these questions, because this is one of the reasons we wanted to hold this webinar, was to source what don't we know collectively, and we can do our part to work together and try to get some clearer and better answers out of the agency in the next weeks or next couple weeks. So just thank you for flagging that, and that's one of the values of doing this, so appreciate it. And I think we're getting close to time. We do have a request to talk just a little bit more about organic dairy pricing. So maybe that'll be the last thing we check in on briefly before we shift to some resources and next steps. We've got Renee hi Renee, says a lot of their dairy farmers sell to Organic Valley and wanting to know, should we be encouraging our organic dairy farmers to be applying? Can they show a loss?
Stephen, I defer to you.
if they can answer the questions honestly and look at the form, and I certainly would give it a go. I mean,
what folks might be kind of dancing around without wanting to name, and I'm just going to do it here, is that a lot of organic producers may not have experienced more than 5% loss themselves. That is immaterial. The fact that dairy as a category lost more than 5% makes that commodity eligible. So if you are one of the very fortunate people who's making out great and are still eligible for payment, congratulations. Just recognize that you're one of the very few.
Yep. There we go. All right. I think this is a good spot then. So we're pretty close to time. So we will take just a few more minutes here as we get to 90 minutes. I want to just take a moment to wrap up with a couple of next steps. And I want to get you guys connected to a whole host of resources that are either available right now or are coming very, very soon, again, to help you in your work and to help you in your research and your support directly with growers. And first, just to close out on a reminder, we got some work before us, and we have two kinds of work before us. We have one, our collective work to help, again, to help producers make good informed decisions about this program and about their eligibility, and to do all that we can to connect them to real aid that reflects their impacts, including the potential of this program. So just note, like, we have that work, we're here for you. And then we have other work to do too. We've got to continue working together to press USDA and press Congress for better, more inclusive, more equitable aid going forward. As we outlined, that work is an uphill push. It is not done. We need you in that fight. So thank you for all you're doing. And again, just to double down and preview what I'm about to say about resources, your input, your questions, your feedback now, it absolutely makes a tremendous difference in the ability of us as advocates to support growers, to support your work, and to directly talk to the agency and our lawmakers. So just know that's really, really helpful right now. So to that end, a couple of resources and input opportunities, and I'm gonna paste these in the chat box, and I will also just note, we're gonna send these to you in email at the close of the webinar as well. So if you miss copy pasting in the chat box, that's okay. First, some resources. I just pasted them in. The flag guide that Lindsay and Stephen just walked through with aplomb is brand new, hot off the presses on their website, I believe in the last hour. So you can download it, that is free. In SAC, we have a, not as quite in-depth, we have some 101 information on our website. It includes some cost case studies thanks to our member PASA Sustainable Ag. And we're gonna have a one-page eligibility tool available later today. So if you're working with folks to gauge eligibility, that will help you make those calls. And then I pasted 3 hotlines. FSA's national hotline. This is maybe potentially of value if you're working with producers who are far from a county office or for whom they've had a negative experience with a local office. This national hotline may be a second authoritative USDA source to get questions answered or support offered. We would love to hear how that hotline is working and if you hear reports of either successes or difficulties in getting good advice and answers from the call. Farm Aid, as mentioned, they have a farmer hotline staffed 5 days a week, 7 days a week. Five days a week. Farmers can call. Also, farmers can call FLAG, Legal Services Hotline. That number is now in the chat box. And that is a quick round. And then I've got a couple of input opportunities to walk us through as well. And these are all a little bit of a review of what we talked about. But just a reminder again, Alesha mentioned it briefly. We've developed a farmer feedback form. So again, to emphasize again, hearing reports from the field about what's working and what's not is incredibly valuable and helps us make the case in the media and to Congress and to USDA where they're falling short. So we have created a form. It can be anonymous. So if you're working with producers and they're experiencing issues, we encourage you to ask them to consider filling it out. It will help us get a national picture of where things are going well and where they're not. In addition to that, but note, this is a form for feedback. It's not a form for direct legal assistance. So that's where the hotline comes in. If you're interested in the Nofa and additional crop eligibility, I pasted in that link one more time, USDA's instructions on the Federal Register link. And then finally, all call. If you didn't get your question answered, if you think of another one while you're having dinner, that's when I think of my best questions. There's an email inbox here, cfap@sustainableagriculture.net. We'll do our best to support you and help you get answers as best we can. What I did not link to is the USDA main CFAP website. Maybe one of you who has it handy can do that for me. What you will find on that website is all the official forms from USDA and really critically the payment calculator. This is a really helpful tool from USDA. And if anybody is running into tech difficulties with that calculator, I responded to a Q&A in the chat box with a little trick that may help it open more smoothly for anybody who's working with a really old computer or old software. So check it out there and send us emails if you need help. Anything else before we close up? Am I missing any other important input opportunities or resources, team? Looking like okay.
No, I would just underscore that as an org that started in the 80s crisis, that it was the communication flow between service provider communities and those who advocate at the national level that made many things farmers enjoy today possible. We have Chapter 12 bankruptcy, we have an appeals division at the USDA. All of these things came out of people talking to each other and connecting the dots, and we have to do that in a moment like this.
So seconded, so true. So let me just close. I want to first thank our panelists. You all are amazing. Folks have been working so hard, you all, including on holiday weekends and nights and weekends and just all the hours to try and understand what's going on and do our best to help you and help producers. So thank you all, FLAG and INSAC and Farm Aid. And then thanks to all of you out there joining us and hanging in. Appreciate you and all the work you're doing. We could not do what we do, as Alesha said, without you and without our collaboration. So please know our inboxes are open, our phone lines are open. We want to be in touch. We want to keep working together, and we've got plenty to do going forward. So thanks for being a part of it with us. I think we can wrap up.
Bye, everyone.